Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Emily Mack. Emily is the president and CEO of River City Company, the organization best known for Chattanooga's downtown planning and economic development. Emily, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before I ask you if Madonna was as unfriendly as reported when filming A League of Their Own, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well, in my morning cup this morning, it is just plain black coffee, fully caffeinated, and it's delicious. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Is that normal for you?
Yep. Every morning.
You don't doctor it up like 90% of the people out there?
Nope. Just plain black coffee every single morning, and it's what gets me going.
How many you do?
Well, I guess I should be honest.
Well, you could.
I mean, so usually 2 at home.
Yeah.
And then when I get to the office, usually another one.
Yeah. When do you quit? About 10 o'clock or so?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
I
can't go much longer.
Switched to straight water.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty crazy like that.
I switched to decaf a number of years ago.
Oh, well, good for you.
I can't taste the difference.
I taste the difference in my my gumption.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to do a lot of caffeine. I can't do it anymore. All that tells you is I'm old.
Not at all.
Well, welcome. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you for having me.
I've always had a great respect for River City Company and what it's done. And when you came in this morning, I had asked you how long it had been. It's been 4 years.
It's been 4 years. Yeah.
That surprised you?
Yeah. I started this role in 2020 during COVID. And
not easy?
So no, not at all. And those first 2 years of 2020 and 2021 were extraordinarily challenging. And so in many ways, it didn't really feel like I got my feet under me until about 2022.
Yeah. And we're going to talk in depth about River City in a little bit, but I would imagine one of the hardest things, because most people come in to a new role and they got to get to know their team. They got to get to know their clients. But you also had a board you had to get to know, and you couldn't do that by sitting across the desk from them.
No. And so just building those really healthy, robust relationships, not just with your team, but also your board. We work so intimately with the city and the county leadership and philanthropic partners and other partner organizations and community organizations. And so to do that in the middle of a worldwide pandemic was daunting.
Yeah. No hill
challenging. Yeah.
Well, as I said, we're glad you're here, but I do want to start at the beginning. You grew up in Huntingburg. I keep on wanting to say Huntingburg, Indiana. It sounds pretty idyllic, almost right out of Central Casting.
It is. So Huntingburg, Indiana is a small town, population about 6,500 people in southwestern Indiana, kind of down near the Ohio River. And I grew up in a house that was a block away from essentially the intersection of Main and Main. And that's where I lived for the first 18 years of my life. And it's got a beautiful historic downtown. I was so fortunate to have incredible family and friends and really had a wonderful childhood growing up.
Was John Mellencamp music just pumped through the town and everyone just kind of...
Well, that is absolutely what I grew up with, was a lot of Mellencamp. And so I distinctly remember I had Mellencamp cassettes, all over my bedroom. And there's a funny story that I think this would have been, it had to be in the early 1980s. Mellencamp had performed a concert in Louisville, and he was driving back home, and he had a black Porsche, and he's driving through Huntingburg, and it was probably like 2 a.m., and he got pulled over because the police had never seen a Porsche before. And they were like, "What is this?" And they just wanted to look at his car. of course, everything was great. And they obviously, he didn't receive any tickets or anything like that. And he just went on home, but they had never seen a Porsche before. So, but yeah, it was an idyllic childhood in a beautiful town.
I don't want to say those type towns are lost in America, but they sure made up what America is.
Yeah.
Enabling you to grow up in a small town and have that sense of being.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I would walk everywhere and ride my bike everywhere, and I walked to school or sometimes took the bus, and my friends lived on farms. And so you'd pitch in, baling hay and doing whatever you needed to do. And I went to a public school. And when I was growing up, you still got time off of school for spring planting and fall harvest.
Oh, nice. Speaking of pitching, I'm gonna hit you with the League of Their Own question.
Yeah.
And I learned that you actually had a minor role in that when you were 14.
I was an extra in the movie. Yeah.
So it was shot in your hometown.
Part of the movie was filmed in my hometown. So part of it was filmed in Evansville, Indiana, and then the other part of it was filmed in Huntingburg, Indiana. And so League Stadium, it's called League Stadium, is still there today. The scoreboard, everything, there's actually a small museum dedicated to the movie. But yeah, I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school when that movie was being filmed. And so, here's your little tiny town of 6,500 people, and there's Madonna and Rosie O'Donnell and Lori Petty and Gina Davis and Tom Hanks, and of course, cast and crew. And it was incredible, and it was amazing, and it was lovely to just get to experience that. But so many of my friends were, quite frankly, skipping school to go be an extra. And I asked my parents, I was like, please, let me miss school to go be in this movie. And they were like, nope, you are not missing school. And I was not going to disobey my parents. And so I didn't. But I did get up early one Saturday morning, very early at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I remember it was really hot out that day. And I wrote them a note. And I said, I am going to go try to be an extra in the movie. I'll be gone probably for most of the day. And I went to the stadium. It's near the city park. And so I remember it's a couple blocks away. And you had to go through the whole costuming thing. And so they fitted me for a dress, and they did victory rolls in my hair and makeup and everything. And it took all day. Yeah. And I remember sitting in the stands. I did take homework with me. I took my algebra homework with me because I needed to do something while you're sitting there. And they were filming multiple scenes. And I remember most of the morning was spent. It was, they were filming scenes where the players, the Rockford Peaches, were actually playing. And so, there's stuff going on the ball field. And then later that afternoon, they were filming the scene, about an hour into the movie, where the owners are talking. And they told me, they're like, okay, this is your role. And so I was to get up, and I was to walk behind the owners, and I was to point. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. So if you watch A League of Their Own, about an hour and 13 minutes in it, you can see 14-year-old me in a blue dress with victory rolls in my hair, walking behind the owners.
So it's in the stadium. They're sitting there meeting, and you walk behind them and point.
Yep, I'm right there.
What a cool thing to have happen.
It was. And it's amazing that the stadium is still there. I mean, it's probably close to 100 years old now, but they kept so many things from the movie, which is really cool. And so there's actually a AAA team that plays there, and their bus is an old vintage, 1940s bus, which is really cool to be able to see that. And so there were a lot of shots of not only the field, but also the town.
And so really, Madonna, unfriendly?
I remember some of the other actors being so friendly.
Oh, yeah. A little more friendly.
Well, I think, I shared with you that it was interesting as I was thinking about recording this, and you had kind of prepped for, just some things and just asking about history and background and everything. And then I realized, well, I've had kind of two encounters with Madonna in life, because one was during A League of Their Own when I was a freshman in high school in 14. And the second was in 2012. So I was on the Super Bowl host committee at the time. I worked for the city of Indianapolis. And so Madonna was the performer then.
Oh, yeah.
And so having to do preparations for her Super Bowl performance was my second encounter with her.
I bet that was a little more intense.
It was a little more intense, yeah.
To say the least.
Yes.
Well, let's get back to small town, because I think that definitely forms who you are.
Yeah.
You grew up, as I said, in a very idyllic setting, and you start out at 14, you get a minor movie role. But you said two of your heroes at that age were Wonder Woman and Princess Di.
Yeah.
What's the story behind those?
I just became really fascinated with them at a really young age. And I think that it's just strong female leaders, and in very different ways, right? Like, so one is a comic book character.
Yeah.
But I really loved that she used her strong qualities for good, and, to defeat supervillains and to make the world a better place. And I really appreciated that about her. And the other was Princess Di. And again, growing up, so many young girls dream, right, of being a princess. And so there was that aspect. But I just remember being fascinated and enamored with her commitment, her dedication, and her passion to making the world a better place. And so her dedication to children and to hospitals, her work in the 1980s relative to AIDS, when it was extraordinarily scary for most people, and she's shaking hands and hugging and loving on people who had been diagnosed with AIDS and landmines. And I just remember again thinking, wow, she is using her position and her talents and her skill sets for good, and to make the world a better place and to break down barriers. And I just really appreciated that about her.
And that was a time when AIDS first hit, that AIDS patients were being quarantined, and you didn't really get near. We didn't know.
Right.
So people didn't get near him, and she very publicly embraced
again
an AIDS patient.
Yeah. Again, growing up in Indiana, when I was in middle school, I believe it was, that's when Ryan White and his story really came out. And
he lived in Indiana, didn't he?
Yeah, he lived in Kokomo, which was almost 4 hours away from where I grew up. So it was, Kokomo's about an hour north of Indianapolis. But again, like that really helped shape, watching what Ryan White was going through, and also Princess Di's work, and really helping to break down those barriers, dispel those myths, was really impactful to me.
Well, and to the Ryan White point, he was a young, innocent kid, and a lot of people just associated AIDS with the lifestyle that they didn't agree with, where here was this innocent kid affected by it. Why would you ostracize him? And I think in addition to Princess Di was Elton John, who really stepped up and said, wait a second here. Yeah,
exactly. And so that, I just remember those were all just really impactful moments in my life.
Obviously had an effect on you.
Yeah.
So growing up in a small town, you tell me you couldn't have had two more small town idyllic jobs as a kid growing up.
Yeah. So my first two jobs that I really got paid for, I mean, of course, there's babysitting and things like that, but I was a lifeguard. And so I worked at a lake during the summer months. And then also, I think I was 15 when I started waitressing at a little cafe called Fat and Sassy's.
I saw that, and I love that name.
Yeah. So there was an older gentleman, Bob Rosenblatt, and he often he went by Rosie. And so he started this cafe, and it was really and truly one of the hearts of the community. It's where everybody went. And so everybody always went to go see Rosie and have breakfast, lunch, an early dinner. And it was vibrant and it was hopping. And I worked there and I absolutely loved it.
Was it a bit of a political nerve center for the town?
Very much so.
The mayor and the movers and the shakers would...
Absolutely. Anyone and everyone would go there. And so it was really great to just... I loved waitressing. It was fun. Yeah. You never sat down. I mean, you were working from 7:30 in the morning until, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, never stopped moving. Your feet hurt, your back hurt, every muscle in your body hurt. But it was so fun to be able to interact with folks. And I loved it. Like they were coming there to just, have a good time and to break bread with each other. And so to me, it was a way of serving them and making their day even better. Yeah. And I loved it. It was one of my most fun jobs.
Well, and it's also a job where this different cast of characters is coming into your life at different tables. So, each table is almost like a different sitcom.
It was. And so, we talked about the movie A League of Their Own. Yeah. So there was actually a second movie also filmed in Huntingburg called Hard Rain. It's a little less popular, but Christian Slater and Minnie Driver and Morgan Freeman and Betty White and Ed Asner were all in that movie. And I was working at the cafe during that time. Well, it's a small town. There's one place to get pizza. There's one place to get Chinese food. There's one place to get, some breakfast food and lunch and early dinner. So that is the only place to go. And so I distinctly remember when they were scouting that movie and all the crew came in and stuff like that. Like I just got to know all of them because it was literally the only place in town where you could get coffee.
You have siblings?
I have one sibling. I have a sister who's about 6 years younger than me.
So you probably grew up with a good girl dad. Someone putting confidence in you. And I'm saying that because of some of the things that you've idolized or Wonder Woman, Princess Diana, strong women. Can you talk about that a little, how important that was?
Yeah. I had an incredible dad. My dad passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was the best girl dad. And so he really instilled in me that I can do anything that any man can do. He told me, he was like, you're probably going to have to work harder. You're going to have to work ahead. You're going to have to be smarter. You can never give up. But he was always there for me. And he always surrounded me with wisdom and guidance. He always gave me incredible advice. He was so logical. But at the end of the day, he always surrounded me with love.
That's the most important thing. I've got 2 daughters, and it's so pleasing to watch them grow up, but you also try to give that advice the way your dad gave it and be there to be supportive. But you're right. You have to work twice as hard to be noticed.
Sometimes, yeah. And I, over the course of my career, I have worked in extremely male-dominated fields. And even in college, when I was 19 years old, maybe 20 years old, I worked a summer at a large construction project. And so it was me and about 400 men.
What did you do?
I literally worked construction. So I worked on the restoration of the West Baden Springs Hotel, which was a massive, about a $50 million restoration project in French Lick, Indiana. And it's a beautiful historic hotel. And I was on the paint crew. And so it was me and 40 men. And I would often get assigned some of the more unique tasks because I'm not a very tall person. If I stand up really, really straight, I'm about 5'2". So I'm shorter than a lot of men. And so I was often tasked with painting in really unique areas or priming, scraping steel, working up in the roof. I mean, at one point for several weeks, I was strapped in a harness and they would drop me down from the middle of the roof and I would lay on my back and paint. So
you were like Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, lying on your back.
It was interesting. It was a great job and I loved it. And so, especially during the summer, I'd get up at about 4 a.m. We'd start work around 5 a.m. and it'd get really hot in the afternoon, working under the dome and the glass. And so we would usually take a break about 1 o'clock. We'd go back into what is now the kitchen and we would take naps in the old freezer. And then at about 3, 4 o'clock, when it cooled off, we'd go back to work and we worked till about 8 o'clock at night.
Well, how formative was that?
I loved it.
Yeah.
Like I loved working construction and you should have seen my arms. Like they were incredible.
I bet. And it's all led into what you do today also.
Yeah. But, going back to your original question, my dad was a huge, huge influence on my life. And he always was there for me. He gave me the freedom that I needed to be who I am.
Yeah.
But he was always there cheering me on.
Well, he did well.
Thank you.
So you decided to go to college?
I did decide to go to
Butler
college.
University, the Butler Bulldogs.
So Butler is located in Indianapolis, and I almost went there, but I ended up going to Bradley University.
Bradley.
Yeah. I went to Bradley University, which is in Peoria, Illinois, and Bradley has an incredible communications program, like amazing. So I went to Bradley in the mid 1990s. And so that was when Katie Couric was she was at the height of her career, and I really wanted to go into communications, and I thought that I wanted to be a journalist or a broadcaster. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I went to Bradley for their comms program. And after about 2 years, I realized, I was like, I don't think that's the lifestyle for me. Like I am really grateful that by that time at 19 years old, I realized that moving from city to city and constantly fighting for your next position and your next role in this really cutthroat industry.
And not paid much either.
And not paid much. But, I didn't really care about the money. I realized that wasn't the quality of life that I wanted.
Yeah, that's a hard role. And all you have to do is watch local television and see reporters come every 2 years.
Yeah.
And then they try and get to a larger market. Then they try and get to a larger market.
Exactly. And so after 2 years, I was like, okay, I don't think this is for me. So then I switched my major and I was like, well, I'm going to go get a business degree. Like I'm going to switch colleges and I'll get a business major. So changed my major, signed up for all the requisite classes and had to take, because I was in the College of Liberal Arts and then I switched to it would have been a Bachelor's of Science degree. So I had to take all these other courses and I started taking accounting and statistics. And I was like, I don't like this.
Well, no kidding.
So I made it through that, but I was like, oh gosh, I don't think this is for me. So then I switched my major again. I think my parents were real nervous by this time. They're like, oh no, what's happening? So then I switched to education and I was like, oh, I would love teaching. I think I would really like that. And I got into that. And then I realized, I'm not sure that this would make me happy. I don't really think that this is for me. So then I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And I was like, I'm just going to take classes that I'm passionate about, that I'm really interested in. And I'm really hoping that this leads to something and this will kind of help me see what I really enjoy and what I want to do.
And you'll know it when you see it.
I'll know it when I see it. So I started taking classes that were really of interest to me and that I really loved. which was a lot of history. And then I signed up for a women's studies minor because I was really I was interested in women in leadership positions. And so I ended up graduating with a degree in history and women's studies. And I can be very candid with you. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. My dad, I got to give him so much credit. I mean, he even said this last year. He's like, I wasn't worried about you. I knew that whatever you chose to do, that you would land on your feet and that you would be okay. My mother, on the other hand, was extremely worried about me.
As mothers are wont to be.
Right. And I distinctly remember my mom saying, what are you going to do with a history degree? Are you going to teach? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to teach. And she's like, Emily, what are you going to do with a history degree? And I was like, I don't know, Mom. But look, Bill Clinton is president and the economy is good. I'm going to be fine. It will be okay. Like, let me just figure this out. So like every history major does, I moved to Chicago. And I ended up getting a job working for Dean Foods corporate headquarters in their corporate finance section.
So you started out at Bradley with statistics and accounting. Oh, I don't like that. And you end up with Dean Foods.
Yeah.
Let me go back and ask you a question about as you were going through what you liked and you didn't like and realized. Was that the first time that you had self-doubt? Because in just talking to you a little bit about growing up and some of the things, I'm under the assumption that, okay, this is working out. I'm enjoying this. I'm going this. And then you get to college and it's like, well, that's not really what I thought it would be. Was there any of that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, that was really hard. Like my sophomore and junior year and even in my senior year, I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life.
Kind of scary, isn't it?
It's really scary. On the flip side, I also got really involved in numerous organizations at Bradley. So Bradley is about 5,000 undergrad students. And it's really nice because it's big enough where you don't know everyone, but it's also small enough where you can be really involved. And so I was really involved in my sorority and had a leadership position in my sorority and was involved in a lot of community events and organizations that way. I was also involved in numerous campus organizations. And that's what, I loved that. And I knew that part of me that I really liked being involved and working with organizations and working with the community. I just didn't know at that time in my life, right? When you're 19 and 20 and 21 years old, how do you turn that into a career?
That's hard to visualize, isn't it?
Yeah, I had no idea. But yeah, I absolutely had self-doubt.
Yeah. So you get out of school, you go work for Dean Foods. How long are you with Dean Foods before you go, I don't really like this?
So I was with Dean Foods for about 2 years. And I had, still to this day, I had an incredible manager, an awesome, awesome manager. I had really good coworkers. The company was amazing, just awesome corporate culture, great work environment. Also, I loved that in the kitchen, in the break room, there was all the ice cream you could ever want.
It's my kind of job.
Right. But after about 2 years, I was like, gosh, and I really kind of grew into that role. But I was like, I don't know if I want to be crunching numbers and working on spreadsheets my whole life. I met this great organization, this wonderful company. I have an incredible manager who was also an awesome mentor, but I just didn't know if this was really the job for me. And I didn't really see myself doing that for the rest of my life and in that type of role. So, I was living in Chicago. Actually, I lived in Oak Park, Illinois. And
isn't that McDonald's territory?
Franklin Park is McDonald's. So Oak Park is Frank Lloyd Wright.
Ah.
And so I was like, okay, I decided to volunteer for the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio and become a docent. And it's a really intensive process to be able to volunteer there. And if I recall correctly, I think it was 5 Saturdays in a row at 8 hours a clip. It was 40 hours
and
of
you're
training.
Volunteering.
Yeah, just a volunteer. because you had to know everything about Mr. Wright and his background and his history, but also all the principles of architecture and his beliefs and his work with Louis Sullivan and Wright's principles of architecture and all of that. And so it was a really, really intensive training process. But I remember coming home one day and I was talking to my boyfriend, later fiance, now husband of 23 years. And he's like, I haven't seen you this excited and energized about something in a really long time. I'm glad you found something that's really of interest to you. And so fast forward, I realized I was like, I love architecture.
Yeah.
I love planning. I really love historic architecture. And so that led to me really kind of doing a deep dive into what I was really passionate about. And so I came home one day and I told my boyfriend, I said, I think I would like to quit my job in corporate finance and go to grad school full time.
What was the response?
He said, okay. And he is, that's just him. And he has been incredible and supportive of me throughout my entire career. And so I remember him saying, absolutely, if that's what you want to do and that's what you're really passionate about, let's make this happen.
What would you tell someone listening to this about grad school? Do you feel it's more important to get your undergrad, go out, experience life, try and find what you want, then go to grad school, or do it immediately after? And I know circumstances are different.
I feel like that it really depends on the individual. Like, there are people that I've met that they've known what they have wanted to do since they were a kid. And that is remarkable and amazing. There are people who, they choose to pursue an undergraduate degree. They know exactly what they want to do and they go out and they do it and they have these incredible careers. That just wasn't me. I just didn't know at the time.
Well, you're like 90% of the people out there.
Yeah, I just didn't know. And then I got into the working world and I saw what it was really like. And I had to really find my passion. So, fast forward that at the time, my boyfriend was working at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and that's when the big five firms were separating their accounting and their consulting firms. And so he was going through a career change. Dean Foods also was contemplating an acquisition and a merger. And so I knew that my role might change. And so we talked and we're like, you know what? Like, let's just make a big life change. And so we explored various cities and ultimately decided to relocate to Indianapolis. And I was actually a little hesitant. I didn't really want to move back to Indiana. It was Brian who was like, this is a great city. This is a cool city. I really like it here. And I was like, okay.
Was he from Indiana?
No. So he's originally from Northern Ohio and then grew up in Cincinnati, but he really liked Indy. And so I was like, okay, we'll move back to Indiana. I ended up loving it, but it also gave me the opportunity to pursue my master's. And so I went to Ball State College of Architecture and Planning.
Were you surprised you fell in love with architecture?
Not necessarily, because I grew up in an old house, and it was built in the early 1900s, probably right around the turn of the 20th century. And I loved it. I mean, I remember helping my mom and dad restore this house from the time I was a kid. I mean, I was probably on a ladder at 5 years old. I learned how to restore all the woodwork in my bedroom. I did that by myself when I was 13. And then in college, I worked on the restoration of the West Baden Springs Hotel. But I've always known, like, there's just been something in me, the importance of the built environment, and that buildings and adaptively reusing buildings and redeveloping downtowns and civic cores, that it shapes a town, it shapes a city, breathing new life into buildings and sustaining them. It's always just been something that's in me. And so when I went to grad school, I was like, yes, this is what I was meant to do.
Lit that flame.
Yeah.
So you're in Indianapolis. You get your master's from Ball State in architecture and planning. Then you kind of got in the public sector and learned really that aspect of it. Talk a little bit of your progression through there and of all the things you did in Indy, because I want to get to how that brings you to Chattanooga.
Yeah. So after graduating from grad school, I got my first job at the city of Indianapolis, working for the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission. And my job was a preservation planner. So Indianapolis has 18 locally designated historic districts. And it's very much, if a neighborhood wants to become a locally designated historic district, it's very much a grassroots effort. And historic preservation it's big in Indy. And so really preserving neighborhoods and preserving that built environment in downtowns and commercial areas. So that was my job, was to work with neighborhoods and business organizations and the downtown area on creating preservation plans for those communities. And that is really intensely working with those groups, with those organizations on not just architectural design, but land use and infrastructure and connectivity to really help guide and shape growth and development in those specific areas. And so I did that for about 2 years, and I loved it. I mean, still to this day, one of my most favorite jobs. Absolutely loved it. But after about 2 years, I was approached by the mayor's office to serve as a mayor's neighborhood liaison. So in Indianapolis, it's a consolidated city-county government. And the mayor obviously cannot be everywhere. And so they have what are called mayor's neighborhood liaisons, and it's broken up by geographic area of the city. And the mayor's neighborhood liaisons are essentially an extension of the mayor in those neighborhoods. And you have to know all elements of city-county government. You have to know like all of public safety, all of public works, how water and sewer and, all infrastructure works. So you have to know all community development. So CDB, things like community development block grants and affordable housing and land banking. You have to know economic development and brownfields. And I mean, the list goes on and on. So I was a little hesitant to take that job. And I remember when they approached me about it, but they said, you're so good at working with communities and neighborhood organizations. I was like, okay. So I agreed to step in that role. It was probably, it was one of the hardest jobs that I've ever done just from time consuming. I mean, it was easily 12 hours a day, every single day. You didn't, I often worked on Saturdays and Sundays. Again, you had to know every element of how government worked, and your job was to break down barriers within neighborhoods, cross-functionally work throughout city and county government to improve the quality of life in neighborhoods.
Sounds like you had to know what the mayor had to know and were just as responsible for that segment that the mayor's going to be responsible for.
And problem solve.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was your job, was to help break down those silos within government and bring various departments and agencies together to solve big, complex projects in neighborhoods. And that's where I really, really cut my teeth in working in local government.
And that led to a couple other things in Indy?
Yeah. So after that administration, I went and I worked for an organization called Downtown Indy, which is kind of the equivalent of River City Company in Indianapolis, and really focused on downtown real estate development.
There's a good training ground.
Yeah, exactly. And it was great. There was a lot happening at that time. And There was numerous buildings, like big buildings that were under construction. Lucas Oil Stadium was under construction. The Cultural Trail was under construction. It was just a massive transformation at that time in Indianapolis. And then I got a call, got called by a different mayor to come back to local government again. And that mayor and the director that I ultimately ended up working for, it was an idea that came out of the previous administration, but the new mayor really liked it. And it was to start a brand new city department, which does not happen in Indianapolis at all. I think the last time that a new city department had really been created was when Senator Lugar served as mayor, and back in 1967. It's really structured in Indy. And so the idea was to start a brand new city department, which is today known as the Department of Business and Neighborhood Services. And so this was back in 2009. And it was consolidating all of the city's permitting and licensing and inspection services and putting that all under one roof. And that's a big operation with hundreds of people involved.
Doesn't Chattanooga and Hamilton County have a similar setup with, what is it, the Resource Center?
Yep, the Development Resource Center. So something very similar.
Kind of one-stop shopping for permits and zoning and everything.
Yep, exactly. So I agreed. I was a little hesitant. Again, I was like, oh, this is a big job.
Well, talk about that a second, because you're obviously doing well, progressing. People are coming to you saying, we want you to do this, but you're going, can I handle this? How do you convince yourself that, yeah, I'm up for this?
I talk to a lot of people and use them as a sounding board. And
that's important.
Yeah, I actually remember I had a really good relationship with Mayor Bart Peterson, who was the previous mayor that I had worked for at the time, and his chief of staff, who is just an incredible, awesome person. And I remember calling both of them and talking to them and, sharing with them. I was asked by the next administration to do this, and what do you think? And using them as sounding boards and some other really respected colleagues. And it was a huge task, a daunting task. And I knew what that meant going in it. I knew that was going to be 12 hours a day, every single day, nights and weekends, and that this was going to take years of my life to do. And if I'm one of those people, if I'm going to take on a job, I am going to give it my 100% every day. And also, being able to balance that to the best of my ability with a healthy work-life balance and making sure that I can also be there for my family. So I needed to make sure, to kind of do this internal check, like, am I ready for this? Like, can I do this? I'm kind of psyching myself up.
So you can do kind of a self-inventory.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay. So I agreed to do it. And again, incredible experience. I was in that role for 4 years. And I often say, I think I learned more in those 4 years than you would like 16 years in any other job. I also worked for an incredible director. In some ways, we could not be more different from humans, but someone that also really, really helped shape my career.
That person's still a mentor?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. So, and then as I'm doing that job, of course, we were also preparing for this little thing called a Super Bowl.
Oh, they had that, didn't they?
They did have that. Yeah. So here I am starting a brand new city department and consolidating all these operations. And of course, I'm working with 25 city county councilors and all of the mayor's office leadership, and you have to get everything, like there are ordinances and you're codifying everything. And then you're also preparing for this, little event called the Super Bowl.
And that's not something you plan a year. That's 2-3 years planning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was also one of the most incredible experiences, and what you learn about event planning and logistics is,
it's like a master class, I bet.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're having obviously a lot of success in Indiana. You're doing a lot of things, particularly in the public realm. you get a text from your sister.
I do.
How's that get you to Chattanooga?
So in 2016, at that time, I was called by a different mayor, Mayor Joe Hogsett.
How many mayors has Indy had?
Actually, Indianapolis has had incredible mayors, but there's term limits. So you can only serve 2 terms. And so I was really, really fortunate to be able to work for 3 incredible mayors. But in 2016, by that time, I was working for an architecture and planning firm, and I'd kind of gone back to my roots, loved it, was working on major projects. And so it's January 2016. I will never forget this. My phone rings. I'm like, I don't recognize this number. And I answered it, and it was Mayor Joe Hogsett. And I was completely and totally taken aback. And he asked if I had time to meet and time to talk. And I, of course, said yes. Yeah. And so we ended up having a really great conversation. And he asked if I would serve as his director of the Department of Metropolitan Development, which was my dream job. And still to this day, I've had so many great jobs. One of my most favorite jobs, incredibly taxing, but an awesome, awesome team. And so that was the Department of Metropolitan Development oversees all city planning, regional planning, transportation planning, historic preservation, and then all of the city's economic development, incentives, real estate, brownfields, as well as all the community investments.
That's a big job.
All the community development block grants and continuum of care and a lot of federal money. It is a big job, but I had an incredible senior leadership team. They empowered and engaged their teams, and it was just a truly, truly remarkable experience. So I was in that role. Fast forward to 2020, right? And everyone's world changed in March of 2020, and including what we were working on at the Department of Metropolitan Development. We turned and modified so much of what we were working on into pandemic response and just doing anything and everything that we could to help the residents of Indianapolis. So
you had to stop what you were doing, basically, and refocus on something completely different for the community.
Like so many people did, right? And we're not unique in any way. So everything we were working on was in direct response to the pandemic and providing immediate outreach and resources and services to Indianapolis residents. You know, for some folks, I think they got a little bit of a respite during the pandemic and they're working from home. And instead, I think my job might have doubled. And so, yes, we were working at home, but it was incredibly long hours and incredibly, incredibly stressful. So fast forward 2 months later, you know, we're still deep into this worldwide pandemic. And my sister sent me a text. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon. And I saw it come in. I remember sitting at home at my desk and, you know, I'm on a Zoom call and I'm like, oh, what is Kate texting me about? And I looked at it and I was like, I can't deal with this right now. And I just put my phone down. So
did she live here?
Yeah, my sister's in Chattanooga. My sister and her family are in Chattanooga. And so I, finish up my work day. It's late that night. It's probably, 9 something that night. And I remember walking into our family room and sitting down on the couch, picked up my phone and I looked at it and I was like, oh, wait, what did she text me? Maybe I should actually pay attention to my sister. And I looked at it and she said, hey, I know you're not looking for a job, but this really incredible opportunity came up. And I was like, oh. And I remember clicking on it and I saw River City Company, Chattanooga, Tennessee. That meant nothing to me. River City, I didn't know River City Company at all. So for some reason, and I don't remember, I think it was the next day or the day after, I opened it again and I looked at it and I actually read the job description and I was like, oh.
Fit you to a T.
This is everything that I love to do. So I sat on it for a little while and then I remember meeting my husband for quote unquote lunch, which means we actually met up in the kitchen, right? Because we're working from home. And I said to him, I was like, hey, Kate sent me this job description, and I think it's kind of cool. And he's like, okay. And I said, but it's in Chattanooga. And he goes, okay. And he's like, you know what? If it will actually get you to like update your resume and like think about what's next for you, because how long can you physically, mentally, and emotionally like keep this up? He's like, hey, it could be a good exercise. And then I distinctly remember him saying, it'll probably go nowhere. And I was like, okay.
Famous last words.
Right. So I remember that weekend updating my resume and drafting a cover letter and all the requisite stuff. And I applied for the job. And I was like, he's right. This was a good exercise. And I'm glad I went through this, and it made me really think about what's important in life and what I'd really like to do. And then I got a call. And then, I think there were 4 rounds of interviews. And in the course of those 4 interviews, I think there were a total of 57 different Chattanoogans that I talked to. But one thing led to another, and here I am.
Here you are. And you came in at a time, worldwide pandemic. People are sending people home from work. So downtown is emptying out.
Yes.
Particularly lunches. I know some restaurants closed up.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if the Lookouts started their discussions of we need a new stadium at that point, but that's a challenge to walk into. How do you recover from a pandemic? So you went into that wide-eyed knowing what was up. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was living it. I saw it in the city of Indianapolis and what that was doing to downtown and to those businesses. And so it was absolutely top of mind. And so thinking about downtown recovery, right? What is going to happen to downtowns? What is next for downtowns was something that I was living and breathing every day already. And so then to think about, okay, what does that mean for Chattanooga, right? What can we do to help downtown Chattanooga successfully emerge from this worldwide pandemic? What can we do in the short term? What do we do in the long term? How do we help our property owners and our businesses and our area attractions? How do we welcome people back to places of employment and enjoyment? And so that's what I lived and breathed in 2020, 2021, 2022, and in some cases still today.
I want to get to present day River City, and we're running out of time, and I got a few more questions for you, but can you give a high altitude overview of the challenge of the lookouts are moving?
Yeah.
And we got to update the 21st century waterfront. Can you just give a 50,000 foot view of what may be coming, or the process that you went through to decide what may be coming?
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, it started with Chattanoogans. It started with asking our Chattanooga community if there were to be features and amenities added to those riverfront parks, if the baseball team does relocate and there is redevelopment opportunities for AT&T Field, what do you want? What do you want to see and do and experience? And so both of the Evolving Our Riverfront Parks projects and the vision for Hawk Hill, both of those started with Chattanoogans. And we listened to our community and understood what was really important to them, and then went from there. So Hawk Hill is a great example. We started that kind of framework vision planning process in March of 2023. And that's exactly where we started, was consulting our community. We started with a robust community survey where over 3,000 Chattanoogans, I think, responded in like less than 3 weeks, which is pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. And then we had a lot of stakeholder meetings and what I call listening sessions. And so it was surrounding ourselves with businesses and property owners and area attractions and utilities and public safety and transportation, and just listening as much as we possibly could. Similar process for the riverfront parks. And then we looked at data. And so we engaged experts to help with real estate market studies to understand what is economically viable, what's going to be successful. And then, of course, surround ourselves with incredible planning entities. And so for the riverfront parks, we engage some of the best agency landscape and planning. They specialize in riverfront and waterfront parks, as well as groundswell relative to programming and activation. For Hawk Hill, we engage the Urban Design Associates, and what they really specialize in is helping to create those framework plans, helping you to understand, based on that community input, based on that real estate market data, what are those viable land uses? What's that mix of land uses? What are low, medium, and high density options? What type of infrastructure is going to be necessary to redevelop that site? And then how do you apply excellent urban design principles, public realm, create spaces for everyone, all Chattanoogans to enjoy? And then how does that connect into downtown? So that's a really high-level overview of how we approached those two projects.
And we're recording this before any announcements are being made. But I think it's safe to say you're excited about what's to come.
I'm really excited about what's to come. And so I think that I really hope that Chattanooga embraces this. I know you can't please everyone, but I'm really hoping, and then we've really tried to keep in mind throughout this, I want the future of AT&T Field and the riverfront parks. I want spaces and places for every single Chattanoogan at every single point in their life, whether you're 2 or 82.
I can't wait to see it. I'm closer to 82 than 2. Before I get to my last question, I want to remind our listeners who makes all of this possible, and that's the Tennessee Valley Authority. I thank them for sponsoring my Morning Cup. You can follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, or you can visit tva.com/do good here to explore exciting career TVA opportunities. Last question.
Okay.
What would you tell that 25-year-old Emily Mack is important for a happy life?
Just follow your heart. Just listen to yourself and be true to yourself. Be true to your moral compass and follow your dreams.
It's good advice. You would not have discovered architecture if you didn't discover that passion.
Right, exactly.
Something about scraping the paint off that resort that got you.
It was great. I was hanging from a ceiling, scraping paint. And going back to Mellencamp, I will never forget, actually, I was hanging off a balcony. I was 6 stories in the air. And I shouldn't probably be sharing this, but I had a harness on. I was not properly strapped in, hooked up, because you moved around so much. And I was always like bebopping around and everything. So I was 6 stories in the air and hanging off this balcony and not really properly strapped in. And they often brought folks through every Thursday to do the tour and look at it, inspire people and stuff like that. And so John Mellencamp and Elaine, he was married to Elaine at that time, were touring and coming through. And Elaine had a small dog. And that small dog, I guess I startled the small dog, and it barked at me, and the small dog really startled me. And that could have been the end of my career. But after that, I always clipped myself in.
We wouldn't have had you here in Chattanooga.
That's right.
Well, we're glad you're here. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been really great to share.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.